Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Billi FitzSimons.
I'm Sam Koslowski.
You might have seen a man named Zohran Mamdani all over your social media feeds recently. As of this week, he is the new mayor of New York City. Now, as an Australian publication and podcast, it is rare that we would cover such a local election in a country on the other side of the world. But the campaign run by Zohran Mandani has captured the world's attention. On today's podcast, we'll explain everything you need to know about why everyone is talking about the new New York City mayor.
Now, Billi, I actually want to tell you how I discovered Mamdani.
Oh, love it.
As in, I didn't find him out of New
personally.
York's civil society. I stumbled across him in the very early days of his campaign on a graphic design and politics blog that I read. And the blog was talking about how incredible his branding was and the vibrant blue and orange branding that he used. Fast forward probably a year, he's now the new mayor. And you're right, we wouldn't normally cover a local election in the US. Why do you think it is that people outside of New York have been so invested in this race besides the branding?
I love it. You're like one of those people who discovers an indie artist and then they become really big and then you claim forever that you found them first.
When in fact, I only discovered them because I liked their album cover, not actually the songs they made.
Yeah. Okay, so there are two main reasons why I think this really has captured the world's attention. The first is that New York is obviously a global city. It is one of the most famous cities in the world. It is the biggest city in the US, which is, of course, one of the most influential countries in the world. So being mayor of New York is a huge position, and that role being quite high profile is nothing new. There have been many high-profile mayors of New York before. There's Rudy Giuliani, for example, and also Michael Bloomberg. And the current president of the United States, Donald Trump, was also a high-profile New Yorker before his entry into politics. So This is his hometown.
Yeah.
But the other reason is, I think, Mamdani himself is a huge reason why people have been so invested in this, with the way that he has been able to capture and inspire young people and other people who maybe traditionally wouldn't be inclined to go to the elections in the US and vote. Also remembering that in the US, voting isn't compulsory like it is here in Australia. And everyone knows that after Trump won the election, exactly 1 year ago, actually this week, the Democrats, who had such a seismic loss at that election, they have been in a real soul-searching era to figure out how to get votes in this era of Trump politics. And I think left-leaning progressive people and politicians are seeing Mamdani's approach to politics as a possible blueprint for getting ahead in the political era of Trump.
And it wasn't just on the Democratic side of global politics, really, that people were paying attention. It was also on the right wing.
Yeah, I think for those on the other side of politics, they have paid close attention to Mamdani's campaign because he represents a very different left-wing opponent than the traditional Democratic frontrunners. And he's more aligned with hardline left-wing views like those of Bernie Sanders and also Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I don't know if you remember her, but she's also a very high-profile Democrat who is much further to the left than the traditional Democrat. And so I think for the Republicans, this election was really important because A, they got to see how Mamdani would be received by the voting public, as it turns out quite well.
Yeah.
But B, it allows them to categorize their opponents on the left as progressively becoming more extreme in their views, which I think is something that they want to do.
Sure. So it's kind of being used by the Republicans as this is the way that things are going and that's why you should stay with us.
Yes.
That is a pretty standard political response.
Yes.
But I want to go back and focus on Mamdani himself. Give me a sense of who this man is.
Okay, I'll give you a quick bio. So Mamdani was born in Uganda to Indian parents. He's 34 years old. He was previously a member of New York State's lower house, and before he entered politics, he was a housing councillor, and he also had a short stint as a rapper.
Very Brooklyn, very New
Yes.
York.
Now, he identifies politically as a democratic socialist, which means that he believes in establishing socialist policies through traditional political systems. So essentially, he believes in taxing the wealthy more and then using that tax money to redistribute some of the wealth to lower socioeconomic classes. You will hear some of his opponents say that he is a communist, but that is not how he himself identifies. He says that he is a democratic socialist.
One of the interesting ways I heard democratic socialism and communism separated through this campaign is that democratic socialists have the same ideas as communists. Communists want to dismantle the system, and democratic socialists want to use the system to achieve those ideas.
Huh.
And I thought that was a pretty easy way to understand something that takes tens of decades to try and figure out. But I know that's oversimplifying, but it gives you a sense of he wants to play in the game.
Yes. The only other thing I would add is that communism would be be more extreme than socialism.
Well, it's not about believing in the systems that are there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, as I've said, he was the Democratic Party's nominee in this election, and he campaigned on cost of living relief. Now, if you know anything about New York, you probably know that it is one of the most expensive cities in the world to live in.
Yeah.
So that was a big focus of his campaign. Things that he included in his campaign was things like rent freezes, free public buses was a big thing, and he also wants to significantly lower the cost of childcare. Now, another thing that came up a lot during the campaign was that Mamdani was also open about his support for Palestine. Now, some Jewish groups did accuse him of anti-Semitism, but he consistently said that he believes Israel has a right to exist. He did, however, refuse to say it should exist as a Jewish state.
And the reason why that's important as context is that New York has an extremely large Jewish population, one of the biggest in the world. So in terms of getting the votes you need, it is not surprising that it came up as an issue. It comes up in most New York elections. And social media was a huge reason why he was so popular, right?
Hi there, my name's Emma. I'm the editor at the Daily Aus, just popping in to say hi and let you know that here at the Daily Aus, we are an independent media company who work to break down the news for young Aussies in a digestible and accessible way. If you like what you're watching and you like what we do, please hit the subscribe button. Now back to the video.
Yeah, the way he used social media throughout his campaign, I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. I think it will now be seen as a bit of a blueprint for how political candidates can use social media really effectively as a vehicle to win their campaigns. His Instagram currently has 7 million followers.
Amazing.
Although since I started writing this script the other day, it's actually gone up by 2 million.
Whoa.
So he is on a rocket ship of social media fame at the moment. And his videos regularly went viral. Not just that, but also videos that other people made of him. There were so many fan accounts. There are so many trending sounds on TikTok. He really used all areas of the internet for his campaign. And I think one of the most amazing things about this part of his campaign, which is a fun fact that you taught me, Sam, is that his social media and graphics were all done by a 2-person design studio in Brooklyn.
Isn't that incredible? In terms of the power of viral growth and the limited resources, at least until the last kind of 2 months of the campaign where he received huge donations.
Yes.
The first ground roots part of that campaign was 2 guys in a flat in Brooklyn.
Yeah. Amazing.
And so why do you think his victory was historic?
Well, it marks several firsts. So he is the city's first Muslim mayor, he is the city's first millennial mayor, and he will be New York's youngest leader in more than a century. He is also the first South Asian mayor of New York. I also saw a headline just right before we came into the studio from the New York Times that said he is New York's first bearded mayor since 1913.
Remarkable.
Yeah. Many, many firsts. Other reasons it was historic was it was over really quick. So the Associated Press declared Mamdani the winner of the race just 35 minutes after polls closed, which is that is crazy quick for an election. And lastly, another reason why it was so historic was that more than 2 million New Yorkers cast their ballots, which is nearly double the number of people who voted for mayor 4 years ago, and the most amount of votes in half a century.
And we know how important that turnout call to action and the turnout to vote is in American elections because it's not mandatory, as you said earlier. So getting people to actually go physically to a ballot box is most of the reason why someone could win. I saw his victory being described in the media as improbable and, a massive surprise. Why was it seen as that? With so much social media support, so much kind of visible support that you've been talking about, why was it still categorized as unlikely?
Well, at the start of this year, not many people knew who Mamdani was. He was very unknown, not just in New York, but obviously internationally, although that doesn't make that much of a difference in a local election. But he was just very unknown. So at the start of this year, Mamdani was polling at 1%.
Wow.
So polls predicted that he would receive 1% of the vote in this election. Now, as we know, he actually received more than 50% of the vote, and that's why he has now won. And in order to win, he needed to beat someone like Andrew Cuomo, who is the former state governor of New York. So he has an established reputation and people are familiar with him. Although that can sometimes be a bad thing, which is, I think, what we saw with Andrew Cuomo in this case. He has been surrounded by many controversies throughout his time, and that was used against him consistently. And so I think Mamdani was really seen as this change candidate, which is something that often comes up in elections, who's going to bring the most change to whatever region we're talking about. So sometimes being a high-profile person can work in your favor, sometimes it doesn't. But you're right that people did see Mamdani's election as improbable. And after his victory, I wanted to read out a quote from high-profile Democrat Bernie Sanders, who you mentioned before, because he is much further to the left than the traditional Democrat. And Bernie Sanders said that Mamdani, quote, pulled off one of the great political upsets in modern American history.
One of the turning points in the lead up to the vote on Tuesday, I think, was Donald Trump coming out and endorsing his opponent, Andrew Cuomo. Mamdani talked about that a lot. And interestingly, and similar to what you were saying before, it almost worked against Cuomo because of Trump's lack of popularity in New York. But tell me about the relationship now between the current president of the United States and the new mayor of New York.
Well, it's not great. You can probably tell from how I've described Mamdani's politics that they are quite different to Trump's politics. Some would say that they are on complete opposite sides of the political spectrum. Here is what Mamdani said directly to Trump during his victory speech.
After all, if anyone can show a nation betrayed by Donald Trump how to defeat him, it is the city that gave rise to him. So Donald Trump, since I know you're watching, words for you. Turn the volume up.
In terms of what Trump has said about Mamdani, he has been very critical of him throughout this entire campaign. Like I said before, he has called Mamdani a communist, and he also threatened to cut off funding to New York if Mamdani won. So I think essentially not a great relationship at all.
And speaking of the president, a lot of people, especially on socials, have now said that Mamdani should be the president of the United States one day and that this is the future of US politics. But that can't actually happen, right?
No, simply because of the US Constitution, it cannot happen. So the US Constitution is very clear in saying that the US president must be, quote, a natural born citizen. And like I said before, Mamdani wasn't born in the US. He was born in Uganda.
I think it's always really interesting when us as an Australian audience do take such an interest in a city election on the other side of the world, but it's clear from talking through this with you of why and what he represents to a lot of younger audiences, especially around the world. He's got a huge job ahead of him now, though. There are 300,000 employees that fall under his remit now in the city of New York, which is just a gigantic task for a 34-year-old. Billi, thank you for joining us and explaining that all to us today.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on the Daily Aus. What a big week of news it has been. We really appreciate you tuning in every day. We'll be back in your ears with the headlines. Until then, have a good day.